Do you ever wonder what happens when the veil between our world and the next is thinnest? They say it's on Halloween night when the dead walk among us and some doors are best left closed. But what happens when those doors open? When you come face to face with something that doesn't belong in this world? I've lived it, I've seen it. And now I'm here to tell you 3 stories, 3 nights that will haunt me for the rest of my life. This isn't just folklore or urban legends. These are true stories, and they all happened on Halloween. Story 1. The Monk of Pontefract, Halloween 1974. It started like any other Halloween in Pontefract, England. The air was cold and the streets were alive with the laughter of children dressed as witches and ghosts. But inside the Pritchard family home, there was something far darker lurking. They had lived with the strange occurrences for years, the unsettling noises, objects moving on their own. But this Halloween, everything changed dramatically. The house was notorious in the neighborhood, known as the most haunted house in all of the UK. And at the center of it all was the monk, a spirit so malevolent, so filled with rage that even the bravest locals wouldn't dare step foot near the place. That night, the Pritchards had invited a few friends over. They thought maybe the presence of others would keep the entity at bay. They were wrong. As soon as the guests arrived, the air changed. It became colder, sharper, like the house itself was breathing. Suddenly the doors slammed shut on their own, every single door in the house. Bang, 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 the guests were trapped inside. Panic started to set in, but the worst was yet to come. One of the guests screamed. She said she felt something, cold like ice-cold hands wrapping around her throat. She was being choked, lifted off the ground by something unseen. Her eyes bulged, her breath came in gasps, and just as quickly as it started, the entity dropped her to the floor. She lay there, trembling, struggling to understand what had just happened. Everything in the house began to move. Chairs, tables, even the heavy china dishes flew through the air, narrowly missing the guests. The terror was overwhelming, but it wasn't until they saw him that they truly felt fear. Standing at the top of the staircase was a figure cloaked in black, his eyes glowing like embers. The monk. They ran, tried to at least, but every door they tried was locked. The priest who came later said he'd never felt such a dark presence, something ancient and filled with hate. They managed to escape eventually, but not before the monk left them with a reminder. Claw marks etched into the walls, deep scratches that no one could explain. To this day, the Monk of Pontefract continues to haunt that house. And every Halloween, the air grows colder, the lights flicker, and the house itself seems to remember that one night, the night it nearly claimed more souls. Story 2. The Salem Cemetery, Haunting Halloween 2010. I'll never forget the night I joined a ghost tour in Salem, Massachusetts. The year was 2010, and Salem was as lively as ever on Halloween. The streets were buzzing with costumed tourists, but beneath the surface, something much darker was waiting. I was with a group, standing in the old Burying Point Cemetery, one of the oldest in the country and the final resting place for those executed during the infamous witch trials. The air was thick with history, but something else was there that night, something sinister. We gathered around a grave, the guide speaking about the tragic past of one of the accused witches. That's when it started. A chill, one that cuts through your bones even though the air was warm. People began to notice cold spots, whispers in the wind. The guide dismissed it, chalking it up to the typical ghostly phenomena you might expect. But this wasn't typical. A woman in our group suddenly screamed. I turned to see her being dragged, yes, dragged toward an open grave that hadn't been there moments before. It was as if something was pulling her, and her screams were like nothing I'd ever heard before. We rushed to help, and when we pulled her free, her ankle had the distinct marks of bony fingers gripping her skin. That's when we saw them, shadows, dark, human-like figures moving between the graves. But when we tried to focus on them, they vanished. It was as if they were playing with us, taunting us. We didn't stick around to find out what they wanted. The tour ended abruptly, and we left in a panic. The next day, the story made headlines. paranormal investigators descended on Salem, convinced that the spirits of the executed witches had returned to exact their revenge. Some say they felt betrayed by the living, others believe they were angry at being disturbed. Either way, I haven't been back to Salem since that night. And the woman who was dragged that night? She still has the marks on her ankle, a reminder that sometimes the dead do not rest. The haunting of Halloween 2010 remains one of the most chilling experiences of my life. It serves as a stark reminder that the past is never truly gone, and the spirits of Salem still linger, waiting for the next Halloween night. As the dawn broke, we left the cemetery, forever changed by what we had witnessed. The story of that night continues to haunt those who were there, a tale passed down through the years, growing more terrifying with each retelling. And so, the legend of the Salem Cemetery haunting lives on, a chilling reminder of the power of the past and the spirits that refuse to rest. Story 3. The Halloween Ghost Train of New Orleans, Halloween 1981. New Orleans is a city of ghosts. No doubt about it, but there's one story that even the locals whisper about, the ghost train. It was Halloween night, 1981, and I was with a group of friends, looking for a thrill. We'd heard the stories, the eerie sounds of a train long gone, the spirits of passengers trapped forever on the tracks. But we didn't believe them, not until we saw it for ourselves. The tracks were overgrown, rusted, abandoned for many years, but as we walked deeper into the yard, we heard it. The unmistakable sound of a train whistle, distant at first but getting louder. The ground began to tremble beneath our feet. That's when we saw it. An old steam locomotive came barreling down the tracks, but something was off. There were no lights, no conductor, just shadowy figures in the windows, their faces twisted in silent screams. The air grew cold, so cold we could see our breath in the humid New Orleans night. We were frozen, rooted to the spot in terror. When the train finally passed, one of us was missing, Jake. He had been standing right next to me, and now he was gone. We searched for him, calling his name, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. To this day, Jake was never found. Some believe he was taken by the spirits aboard that ghostly train, a train from the past that still haunts the tracks where it derailed, killing dozens of passengers in a fiery crash. Every Halloween since, people claim to hear that same whistle, the same distant rumble of the ghost train. And if you listen closely, you might hear it too. But be warned, if you see it, you may not make it out alive. The legend lives on, a chilling reminder of that fateful Halloween night. These are not just stories, they are warnings. Warnings of what happens when you ignore the signs, when you walk too close to the other side. This Halloween, be careful where you step, because once the dead find you, they never let go. Remember, the veil between the living and the dead is thin, and on Halloween night, it's at its thinnest, so heed these tales and stay vigilant, because the next haunting story could be yours.